Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Micah Doctoroff, and I'm a legislative attorney with the ACLU of California Action, and I will be your MC for today. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event on how public defender offices implement policy to end mass incarceration. We have a packed schedule, so I'll just go through a couple quick housekeeping matters and then turn it over to our wonderful panelists. We will have 3 panels, and then we'll break for questions after all 3 panels have completed their remarks. We would ask attendees to please submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll circle back to those questions at the end of the webinar. And I'd also ask our speakers not to worry about monitoring or answering questions during your presentations, as we'll come back to them at the end. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome our first panelists, Assemblymember Kalra, representing the 27th Assembly District and the newly elected chair of the California Legislative Progressive Caucus, Mano Raju, the San Francisco Public Defender, and McComb, the State Public Defender. And now I will pass the virtual microphone off to Assemblymember Kalra to get us started.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here. We have, it looks like, great attendance already. I really appreciate everyone that's joining in for what will be a very informational, and I hope the beginning of an understanding of how important public defenders are, not just in the work that they do, but in the policy that we create in Sacramento. Just the idea of having a conversation on how public defenders offices can help to implement policy to end mass incarceration is something that I never imagined we'd be in this place. When I first started as a public defender back in 1997, we did not have the wherewithal or did not have the organization or the leaders like Mano and Mary and so many others in our public defenders offices that have taken the time, energy, and thoughtfulness to organize, to show up in Sacramento, and to really speak to such important policies that we put into place. And in fact, like a lot of folks, I've been doing a lot of cleaning up around the house, and I found boxes in my garage, which included my badge that is over 20 years old, my public defender badge, when I worked in Santa Clara County. And it really reminds me of the work that I do even to this day as a legislator. It informs me as to the work that I do. And one thing, if I can just leave you with something as you begin this hour, it's what is the role that public defenders play in our policy making? Because we hear oftentimes from DAs or from law enforcement, and oftentimes what we hear is just no, no, no. The status quo is fine. They don't want anything to change. We're gratefully and thankfully starting to hear from some more progressive voices in the prosecutors that are understanding that when it comes to criminal justice reform, that it has to be done together and it has to be done with the view on what's best for our community. What is the real definition of public safety? Because I'll tell you this, as California became the incarceration capital of the world, back when I was working as a public defender, it really did not have a connection to how safe our communities were. And vice versa, in terms of how safe our communities are, has not really dictated the kind of policies that have been put in place, because traditional lobbying organizations like DAs have focused on fear and a fear-based mentality of how we create policy. What we want to do, and I know what the public defenders aim to do with so many others you'll be hearing from today that do advocacy work, is to actually use common sense, logic, and compassion when putting together how we think about our public safety and criminal justice reform going forward. Obviously, we all want safety, and the difference between a public defender, when you think about what public defenders are asking for, they're not asking for anything different than what most of our families are asking for, which is to have safe neighborhoods, to have safe communities, and to make sure that those that get caught up in the system are treated with dignity, respect, and equity. And at the end of the day, we know that locking someone up and throwing away the key has not only has it not worked, it's been extraordinarily expensive for our state, both in terms of human capital and our fiscal costs in operating prisons and jail systems and what have you. And so you'll see oftentimes when bills come forward, some of the more egregious kind of enhancements, what have you, yes, are asked to kind of get rid of those that have been very clearly linked to racist policies implicit in our system, or those that bias poor people and poor families the most. But also you'll see oftentimes it's the public defenders asking for discretion. They want to make sure that judges have the ability to at least hear individual cases as the individuals are before them, and to not have a cookie cutter system of policy that has led to racial inequity and disproportionate outcomes. And so I'm going to hand it over to our other opening speakers, to Mano and Mary, but I just want to thank all of you for taking the time, because I have such great admiration and respect for my staffers and for all the staffers in the building. You're the ones that really inform us, educate us, and do so much of the work that makes us successful. So thank you for taking the time to hear how important it is for us to have the voice of public defenders in the building when we're talking about policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ash, for those inspirational comments, and thank you all who are in attendance here. This is the 100th anniversary this year of the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. So I think it's really timely that we're doing it at this time, perhaps 100 years later than we should have done it, but it is an honor to be here with members of my passionate and hardworking staff. I'm an elected public defender in San Francisco, and the reason that's somewhat critical for legislators to be aware of is that there is an elected sheriff and an elected district attorney in every county in this state. And I imagine that many of you are hearing from them on the regular. Because of my state policy director, Danica Radarmel, who organized this conference, thank you, Danica, for doing that, have had an opportunity to meet with many of you. However, many of you I have not met with, and it's really imperative, if we're interested in policies that bring about more justice, that legislators reach out to public defenders and reach out, if there's no public defender office in your county, to leaders in the defense community. We're able to provide technical expertise, and we're able to provide that connection to the community that we so desperately need in these times. There have been many progressive reforms that have come down and have become law because of the growing awareness and international movement for criminal legal system reform. And, you know, on behalf of the public defender community, I want to thank legislators for those, for what has come into law. However, without funding for public defender offices, the legislative changes do not reach the individuals and the families they are meant to reach. For example, the laws allowing prosecutors or the Department of Corrections to modify unjust sentences, reforming of the illogical and cruel felony murder law, allowing meaningful parole hearings for youth, or shorter probation terms now, which came into law this year. Unless there is a public defender filing motions, adding cases to calendar, reaching out to affected individuals, the reforms simply lie in the books rather than impacting the individuals, families, and communities that they're meant to impact. So this is absolutely crucial. Many of our offices do a lot too. We have, you know, social worker units, immigration units, mental health units, just to name a few. So funding us does have an impact beyond just the criminal courtroom. We're providing services that holistically help our communities more and more. And please, when you think about public safety, please remember we are a public safety office. And what I mean by that is when someone feels truly heard, feeling truly seen, feeling that there's an advocacy team in your corner fighting for you, generates not only a more just legal outcome, but it's a springboard to clients moving their lives in a more positive direction, which is good for public safety. Other than our clients and their families themselves, because of the connection, relationship, love that a lot of us have for our clients, we are highly motivated to make sure our clients do not slip back into the system. Even after we're done representing a client, like if someone's struggling with an addiction, say, who do you think they're going to turn to? A parole agent, probation officer, someone in law enforcement? No, they're often going to turn back to us because of that trusting relationship rather than someone who has the ability to lock them up. So if we had post-representation staff who could meet with people, do a 1-week check-in, do a 1-month check-in. If someone's slipping, guide them in the right direction. That would have a tremendous impact on public safety, and that would keep our communities safer. And lastly, and I know we're short on time, we have a lot of people to speak today. Don't forget the bread and butter services that we're mandated to provide. Every day across this state, members of our community are convicted or are pleading to things they shouldn't be convicted of. And there's, I would say, 3 evils contributing to that: overcharging, pretrial detention, and what's known as a trial tax, where judges punish people for going to trial. And our budgets pale in comparison to district attorney budgets and to police budgets. To avoid unjust convictions, what we need are defenders' offices functioning at not a competent level, but a high level, with caseloads that don't necessitate undue delays. There's a lot of resources right now going into the back end, trying to shorten sentences, to decarcerate in jails and prisons, try to keep people safe during COVID. It's critical that we do that work, but it's also critical that we have the resources on the front end to avoid those unjust pleas and convictions. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Marycomb. I'm the State Public Defender with the Office of the State Public Defender. And our agency has a new mandate to assist all attorneys providing defense to people who are unable to afford attorneys. Very proud to be a new part of this. We are able now to provide training and special assistance to all defenders with the overall goal of raising up the quality of such defense, along the lines of what Manu just spoke to. And as part of this, we are very, very proud to partner with public defender offices. Those of you who are lawyers may already know what a public defender office is, but just a quick primer. A public defender office is a county-based organization led by a public defender, like Manu and like Carlos later, but who have the job of representing the indigent in the county. Public defenders have professional staffs of attorneys who are lifelong dedicated to representing poor people, along with a variety of support services, sometimes paralegals, sometimes social workers, sometimes other kinds of investigation. In California, 34 of the 58 counties have public defender offices, and the overwhelming majority of people who get involved in the criminal justice system are represented by public defenders. And you're going to hear today the variety of ways in which public defenders help bring about justice in our state and help implement what was just described as a variety of wonderful new legislation that is designed to bring justice to many people. Legislation that will help dramatically reduce the incarceration rate and help people who are the subject of unjust deportation. And I just wanted to give a pitch that county public defenders are at this point overwhelmingly funded by counties. Counties, as you know, are under a great deal of stress right now. And so there are some proposals out there to ask the state government to assist in that. There is right now a proposal being floated by a variety of organizations, including CPDA, the ACLU, NextGen, Immigration Legal Resources, Association of Social Workers, in order to fund these vital services that Manu just talked about, in order to make them a reality. I think that you will see this proposal come across your desk fairly soon, and we ask that you give it very serious considerations. Public defenders are the way forward to make what is abstract right now reality. Thank you.
And if I could just jump in for one quick second, we have 144 folks that are participating. Really grateful to all the staff members that are here. I want to do a special shout out to two of my colleagues, Joaquin Arambula and Mike Gibson, very thoughtful legislators, and it doesn't surprise me they're here to hear more about why we need to listen to public defenders as we craft our policy. So thank you guys for being here too.
Thank you so much to our initial panelists for all of their wonderful introductory remarks. Our second panel will cover advocacy and implementation of new California laws, and will feature Ricardo García, the Los Angeles Public Defender, Rose Cahn, Senior Staff Attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and Graciela Martinez, Supervising Attorney for the Immigration Unit at the LA Public Defender's Office and the Immigration Chair for the California Public Defenders Association. Passing it off to you now.
Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Ricardo Garcia, and I am the Public Defender for Los Angeles County, which is in fact the largest and oldest public defender's office in the country, with a staff of over 1,200 individuals. With the new reform laws, we can fix some of the most egregious injustices of mass incarceration. Defenders can achieve life-changing outcomes with these new laws that you have passed. Penal Code Section 1170D, for example, is for the people who were sentenced to state prison for something they did when they were very young, when their brain was not fully developed. It is for those who have served enough time that they are no longer a threat to anyone, for the elderly, for the infirm. It is for the men and women who are the casualties of mass incarceration and really the casualties of debunked theories of criminology. They are misplaced in our prisons, and they impoverish our state, not just its treasury, but its very soul. But the law by itself is not enough. Under 1170D, the CDCR identifies and then notifies courts of candidates for resentencing, but the courts are not obligated to appoint counsel nor grant them relief. Without a defender, the result is summary denial. But defenders can breathe life into 1170D. From prosecutors and from the agencies that would keep them in custody, we can ask prosecutors to consider clients eligible, and this is written within the law itself. It is more than just asking CDCR to find the people they consider eligible. But to do this requires more resources. The Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office is poised to zealously bring 1170D to bear for anyone whose life it might restore. Already, the office has initiated representation as all the way to its maximum capacity, but the resources are insufficient to reach more than a fraction of the individuals flagged for resentencing consideration. To realize the legislator's vision, Los Angeles needs funding. We need funding for staff to identify our clients who are eligible for resentencing. This requires review of thousands upon thousands of files. There's a need to allocate lawyers to prepare for and to conduct the high-stakes advocacy of resentencing, which is in fact a one-time opportunity that can make the difference between a person being restored to our community or spending the rest of their life in prison. We need paralegals to obtain, collate, summarize prison records, medical records, and to understand mental health histories. And we need social workers to formulate and arrange a detailed and customized reentry plan for those people that were able to get resentenced. Senate Bill 1437 is a second fully but unrealized because of underfunding initiative. This law provides for the resentencing of persons serving time for murder as an accomplice when they never intended for anyone to be harmed. Think of the lookout in a robbery who hurts no one. There's a backlog of opportunity in these cases that is frustrating decarceration. In Los Angeles alone, almost 2,500 cases await review to determine if they are eligible or not. This means that many men and women are waiting behind bars for an attorney to help them exercise their fundamental right to petition the court for relief. The Public Defender's Office cannot meet the need to prepare and to litigate petitions under this new law without committed resources commensurate with what's at stake, and that's life in prison. As an example, if the Los Angeles were resourced with an investment fund for 10 additional positions for just 2 years, this would offset, if not eliminate, the entire backlog that we are currently experiencing. The cost of 10 additional lawyers is minuscule compared to the cost of incarceration. The legislature in its resentencing enactments has recognized that Californians value rehabilitation and restorative justice and reject the futility and cruelty of mass incarceration. But to implement these initiatives, public defenders need to be properly resourced. Otherwise, the dream of justice will die because of the paucity of the purse. Respectfully, we must heed the words of the new president. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value. Resourcing public defenders protects our communities. It makes them safer. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rose Cahn, and I direct the Immigrant Legal Resource Center's work at the intersection of criminal and immigration law. And I will speak very quickly about the absolutely crucial role that public defenders play in defending against some of the most severe immigration consequences. And when I say crucial role, I'm not being hyperbolic. A full 97% of those who were deported in 2017 were deported as a result of some contact with the criminal legal system. In recognition of how, to quote the Supreme Court, intrinsically intertwined immigration consequences are with criminal punishment, the California Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, and the California legislature have recognized that public defenders have a crucial, constitutionally obligated duty to advise non-citizen defendants about the immigration consequences of crimes and defend against those consequences by plea bargaining for immigration neutral dispositions. The ILRC has been fortunate to help champion this work dating back to as early as 1986, when we partnered with the California Public Defenders Association to write the first manual ever written in the country about the immigration consequences of crimes. That same year, we led the first training ever given for public defenders about those consequences right here in California in Fresno County. And since then, obviously, the work has grown and the need has grown. We now have over 16 public defender offices with in-house immigration experts. We have over 34 who have contracts with either our office or another entity to provide that type of individualized case consultation that is required by law. But increasingly, we're recognizing that the crucial role public defenders play is not only on the front end defending against those consequences, but also on the back end, figuring out ways to mitigate or eliminate the ongoing immigration consequences of crimes and allowing families to stay united together in the United States, allowing individuals to be free from immigration detention centers and be free from the threat of deportation. And that role in post-conviction relief is one that the legislature has supported and reified time and time again. We have over 15 new laws in this area that the California legislature has promulgated in the last 5 years alone. These are essentially unfunded mandates. It is public defenders who every day are going into criminal courts, filing 1473.7 motions, 1203.43 petitions, 18.5B motions, all to try to mitigate the consequences that can be caused in the immigration system by even low-level criminal offenses. So as the California legislature heroically and courageously steps into this space, declaring that California has a vested interest in keeping immigrant families together, it is equally important that we fund those who are on the front lines of keeping those families together. And that are the public defenders, those who are on this call and those who are not. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to pass the mic now to Graciela, who is one of those frontline public defenders who's been leading the charge in LA County, who ILRC is so fortunate to have partnered with for decades now.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you. I'm Graciela Martinez. I am the supervising attorney for the immigration unit in LA County, and I am also the immigration chair for the California Public Defenders Association. So collectively, along with our immigration advocate partners like Rose Cahn and Kathy Brady at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and with you, we have done incredible things in California and have been leading the charge. And we should be really proud of ourselves for setting a national standard of what it looks like to be inclusive and to protect our most vulnerable populations. And so public defenders, and especially the offices such as mine, we have established criminal expertise, and we, as with that expertise, we are really force multipliers. We have the education, experience, training to actualize immigrant protective services in our communities beyond the cases that we handle ourselves. We are often the hub, the clearinghouse for practice and procedure under California's new protections that Rose mentioned. We just need the funding to unleash our ready capability. By virtue of our criminal law practice, public defenders, we are a constant presence in every criminal courtroom throughout California and of course here in Los Angeles County. Public defenders are best and perfectly situated to implement the new rights and protections that you, our honorable California legislature, have enacted to prevent the devastation of preventable deportations, which befall non-citizen clients and their families because of even minor involvement in the criminal legal system. For example, using the powerful remedy that you gave us, Penal Code Section 1437.7, we have stopped the banishment and deportation of an Operation Desert Storm veteran who had been in the United States since he was 2 months old. A father who donated a kidney to his daughter, but during financial crisis cashed a bad check to pay for her medical care and consequently had been put in the deportation pipeline. We have kept California eligible for DACA and justice-involved youth eligible for special immigrant juvenile status. So as you envisioned, we have already erased many convictions that would have triggered deportation. Despite COVID-caused court closures, last year, our immigration unit here in Los Angeles, and that doesn't count San Francisco, Alameda, Santa Clara, all the other places where there is an immigrant, what we call the CPDA immigrant practitioner. Last year in Los Angeles alone, we handled 45 vacatures under Penal Code Section 1437. We know that the new reform law works. They can deliver the justice the legislator created them to achieve. We make them work as public defenders. But our successful use of this new law so far amounts to a little more than proof of concept, a promise of their indisputable value, yet an unfulfilled promise for a vast community in need. Call for our help, flood us from the hotline that connects the Los Angeles County Immigration Unit with the Adelanto Immigration Detention Center, which we set up to connect us to some of the individuals whose need for our help is most urgent. These opportunities to help far exceed the resources that we have. And we ask for the opportunity to go beyond triaging our current staffing issues. Right now, we have the capability to fully implement these laws, to give the potential to save lives from unjust deportation laws that have been in play. And so we ask you right now to please help us to consider the proposals that is before you. And again, thank you for your advocacy and for the laws that you have passed to protect immigrant communities.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, Rose, and Graciela. And just a quick reminder to our attendees that if anyone has any questions for any of the panelists that you have heard from so far, or any of our additional panelists, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will come back to questions at the end of the webinar. I'm pleased to introduce our third panel, which will focus on holistic defense and will feature Benjamin Beach, a social worker with the Community Defender Division at the Santa Barbara County Public Defender's Office, Raj Jayadev, co-founder and coordinator of Silicon Valley Debug, and Paul Red, an advocate for human rights for the incarcerated. I will turn it over to Benjamin.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this invitation to speak on the role of social work in public defense. My name is Benjamin Beach. I'm a former social worker for the Tulare County Public Defender, and I'm presently a social worker for the Santa Barbara County Public Defender, though I speak in my capacity as a member of the National Association of Social Workers. Who are the people who hit criminal courts? And why do we need social workers in public defenders' offices to serve them? I think that we're all familiar with the daunting caseloads and complex human tragedy with which public defenders too often contend. In decades past, public defenders have been solely responsible for referring clients to rehab while writing motions, preparing for trial, while working with clients in active psychiatric crises. Public defenders' offices, not public health, are often comprised of the only advocates for those whom our society has mislabeled and branded reprobates. Those experiencing homelessness, involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations, interfacing with delinquency and dependency courts, eviction courts, family courts, and criminal courts, often all at the same time. And their recidivism in any one of these courts can trigger that of another system, recidivism in another court. This isn't to touch on the underlying health disparities, poverty, and traumas that often lead the most vulnerable Californians to fall between the cracks of the very agencies that we would hope to provide siloed interventions. And so the criminal court becomes the intervention, not just to crime, but to behavioral health. And despite the rise in collaborative and problem-solving courts, hundreds of thousands of Californians chronically falling between the cracks of these systems who may have spent their entire lives in free fall struggle to break free of that inertia that brings them back to criminal courts time and again. In my time as a social worker for public defenders, these defendants on my caseload have included an 80-year-old grandmother in a psychiatric crisis, too many combat veterans to count, terrified teenagers and youth involved in the child welfare system, those with intellectual and neurocognitive disabilities disconnected from regional centers, those suffering lifetime substance use disorders, the onset of mental health disorders, and very commonly co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. Social workers have a role in bridging the divide between healthcare, social services, public health, mental health, and the systems that involve the most vulnerable Californians. We are often the actors in public defenders' offices who implement that policy that this legislative body produces. We make mental health diversion, youthful parole hearings, 1170D resentencing, AB 12, AB 109, WIC 202, and AB 823 work. As courts veer toward rehabilitation as an operating principle, the social worker in a public defender's office is in the unique position of holding the absolute confidence of a client, working toward their recovery, while navigating them through systems that may have been harmful in the past. But many do not receive these evidence-based interventions or a holistic defense that observes and values who they are as a person rather than a case number. And without continued involvement in frontline social workers on the defense team, I fear that much of the reform that we hope to arise from legislation cannot be implemented at the local level. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Raj Jayadev. I'm with Silicon Valley Debug, a community organization based in San Jose that is fighting against mass incarceration and systemic racism through community organizing led by directly impacted families and communities. We're like the many organizations and community touchstones from your jurisdictions who are taking to the streets, the voting booths, the City Hall meetings, the Sacramento hearings, to architect this unprecedented moment that represents a real reckoning with the carceral state in California and all of its expressions in police violence, pretrial detention, excessive sentencing, criminalization of our youth. These are the issues our movement for racial justice marches for, holds rallies for, works with you all to change the laws for. But these are also the arenas, the systemic assaults that public defenders fight against person by person, loved one by loved one, every single day on behalf of our community. At Debug, after years of seeing people we love taken from us by incarceration, we developed an organizing model called participatory defense, an approach for families who have incarcerated loved ones to partner with public defenders to impact the outcome of cases. We've trained organizations across California in the practice, and we now have a California participatory defense network that does this freedom work in counties across the state as a partnership with defenders. This is mass movement in a classic sense. Everyday people coming together to collectively push back against the entrenched systems and institutions of incarceration to liberate their son, daughter, mother, father. The work that public defenders do is massive in scale and what it must take on, but intimate and proximate and tangible. Someone's family member is home in the living room instead of a COVID-ridden jail because of a public defender. It is from this vantage point that we see public defenders as absolutely critical if our collective movement to end mass incarceration is to succeed, not just on individual fights for liberation, but also for larger seismic systemic change. And I mean this empirically as well. If public defenders are representing over 80% of our communities facing the system and all indigent people, that means that they are the most important, oftentimes only legal advocate to defend our people from incarceration. As such, for our communities to keep or get our people out of prisons and jails, we need public defenders to be as resourced and as equipped as possible. It is that straightforward and it is that necessary. And from a campaign and policy perspective, defenders are the best positioned to tell us the patterns and practices that are targeting Black and Brown communities daily that is disguised as public safety. Public defenders bear witness every day to the devastation of pretrial detention, of mandatory minimums, of racist enhancements and conviction-obsessed prosecutors. So our movement work to end LWOP, enhancements, transfers of youth to adult court, the nuances of those systemic attacks are communicated to the larger power flexing movement on the ground through the insight, analysis, and intel of public defenders. As many of you know, if you look at any of the most significant county by county or statewide reforms in the past several years, whether they were seen or not, that public defenders were at the forefront of developing organizers and policymakers with those initiatives, informing strategy for the movement in the streets, and certainly the ones responsible for implementing those reforms and lifting those laws off the pages of bill memos into actual freedom stories. There are 1437 resentencing hearings, 1170D hearings, view transfer hearings, bail hearings, discovery motion in afternoon court just after this session by public defenders across the state who are animating the legislative promises of Sacramento into California's being reunited and free. I see public defenders as an extension of our larger movement for racial justice, and I hope you see their central role in our historic opportunity to redefine safety, reckon with the past and present practices of systemic racism, and to free our people. Thank you.
All right, and now believe we have Mr. Paul Red.
Yes, you guys can hear me?
Yes,
All
sir.
right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, I'm Paul Red. I'm an advocate for human rights for the incarcerated. I've done 44 years. Thankful to the Public Defender's Office that placed me up for the 1170D, that I was gained my freedom after 44 years. and had been just recently denied at the parole board in 2018. So having the public defenders and them pick my case up and do the research that they done, you know, they found that I was an excellent candidate for being released. I didn't pose no threat to the community, you know, and as a result of my release, you know, I've been able to come back out here to the community after 44 years and do, I like to say, positive things to help strengthen that community again, you know? So, you know, I'm thankful to the public defender. You know, back when I first came through the public defender in San Francisco, they didn't have all the auxiliary of social workers, psychologists, and et cetera, that helped during those preparing you for trial or even during the sentencing phases. It wasn't until years later that some of the legislators start passing new laws that allow them, public defenders, to extend their services to defend defendants. And it's important now when you look back and you say that the public defenders have done great work and they can continue to do great work, but they need to have more people at their exposure to come in to actually really provide that effective assistance to the defendant, find alternatives that may be available instead of mass incarceration. You know, it's a lot of people, when you look at now, you got transitional housing programs, you got the mental health that's, and that is, I mean, out of control. But if the public defenders now are able to do the research, the investigative work that they need to do, a lot of this stuff could be cut off at the onset. It could save a lot of the taxpayers millions of dollars with alternative besides incarceration. Some of these defendants can be helped at an earlier stage if public defenders are able to bring in the experts to help investigate and look in the background of these individuals, you know, and then you can find out, well, this, you know, putting a person in prison, this does not cure the problem, you know. So alternative is being able to have the funds to be able to do a much better job. And what I could say is public safety first, you know, because like I said, I mean, you can look at some of these cases that occurred. Like I said, if people had the arsenal to do what they can do, then I think you have a reduction in incarceration. So it's very important that the public defenders get the funding to do what they need to do, and it helps. It's a win all the way around the table, you know. And I'm out here trying to help do my part to speak to various people and organizations through these Zooms, and hoping people would, you know, listen to what is being said. You have a lot of people who have gotten out that are doing positive things in the community. And it's thanks to public defenders and other programs that they are able to do it, but they still underfund. They need the funding to do a lot more.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Paul.
you so much, Paul.
And Raj and Ben. That concludes our third panel, and we will now move to some questions for our panelists that have been coming in throughout the webinar. I'm going to do my best to cover as many of the questions that have come in, and we'll have some information for how to follow up with additional questions if we don't get to all of them. So the first question is for Ricardo Garcia, and the question is, if only 10 more attorneys can make a large impact, what is the current budget and what is the cost of bringing on each additional attorney?
Thank you for that question. And it's a little more complicated than just answering it here in the time we have. What I would invite is the member who had the question to contact me. I put up my email, which is rgarcia@pubdef.lacounty.gov, and we can have a more in-depth conversation tonight, because it's not just as simple as a few seconds here. But please do. It's a great question. I'd love to be able to answer that.
Thank you. The next question is, how can we best recruit more public defenders? And this can go to anybody.
Well, I'll jump on that one, since I'm the public defender, and recruitment is such an important part of what we do. I think one of the things is to make sure, it's again about funding, making sure that public defenders' offices have post-bar programs that allow for some sort of stipend for those men and women who want to join our offices right after law school. This would allow us to reach a larger group of individuals, particularly from lower income communities, which are reflective of the individuals we represent, so that we can touch on them and bring them to cities like LA, which is incredibly expensive, or other parts of the state, which are incredibly expensive. These are often funds that are looked at as secondary, because we're talking about students as opposed to the direct resource. But this also allows for not just the recruitment process of bringing quality individuals to our offices from across the state, from across the country, but allows for an early training of those individuals in their careers, so that they understand not just how to physically do the work, but the culture and the reality of what the work is. And so that at the end of that process, they can make a real decision if this is the work that they want to do. Because this is difficult work. This is not easy, simple work. And to do this work for a long time, to sustain this work, you need to have a degree of passion and love for it. And if we can bring people, give them the opportunity to see that early on, they can make that decision before committing to the process. So I think that is critical and key.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo. The next question, and this can go to anybody, what can we do to change what seems to be a widely held public perception that we are safer with every person locked up who has been accused of a crime? How do we turn the aircraft carrier of public opinion that people who are accused must have done something wrong? And how do we turn that around to show the public that the economic, social, and community value of compassion and rehabilitation?
I can take a crack at an answer to that question. Can you hear me? I think one thing to do is to talk to people, to proximity. It's really important that speak to people who are formerly incarcerated, speak to people who've been through this system, get a deeper understanding of that. We've actually started a relationship with a film production company in order to try to tell the stories, so we can tell through narrative some of the things, counter some of the narrative that's been put out there by law enforcement typically, and some district attorneys' offices. And I think another piece is that it's really important that we provide resources to public defender offices, so we can provide the data to show people what is the impact of having a pretrial release unit, for example, that can get in and start communicating with people who are accused prior to even the arraignment, so we can get people the services they need and hopefully get them out at arraignment if that's the appropriate thing, so that they're not detained pretrial while innocent. Another piece is to show, for example, the impact of some of the post-release services that I've been talking about, to show if we can get people connected up with with culturally competent service providers and employment opportunities, what impact does that have versus just extra days of incarceration? But we need to, provide defenders, because usually we're in there just working on the next case, the ability to actually quantify some of the impact of supportive and empowerment services rather than incarceration efforts.
And this is Ben. I think that I could also take a quick crack at it. And I completely agree with Mano in regards to proximity and humanizing, right? That's crucial. And I also think that it's important at a policy level to think of the criminal justice system gradually more in terms of public health and population health than just criminal justice. But by that, I mean, this morning, for instance, I was speaking with a doctor about a client who's both an ER doctor and he's a doctor who works in the jails. And he could identify, look, this is precisely the same population that I see in my hospital regularly. This is precisely the same population that I worked with in street medicine when I served homeless populations. This is often the same population that hits each one of these systems. And for some reason, we can see homelessness interventions in terms of a population and public health issue. And we struggle to see the same population in terms of public health and population health when we view them through the lens of the criminal legal system. And from the perspective of allied health professions, it's just wrong-headed. And this doctor took time off from being an attending physician at an ER to really vent to me about this morning. So yeah, that's just one additional take on how we can kind of reevaluate serving this population and needs of this population.
Mr. Ricardo, if I could just add one final word on that, also, we also, I think, have to be honest and confront the carceral supporters, those people who say we need more jails and more people in jail because it makes us safer. They've been winning that argument for decades. We have been shoving people into cages for decade after decade after decade. And if that story is true that they're selling us, that bill of goods is real, then we wouldn't need to be continuing throwing people in jail because we would have made ourselves safer. They would be telling us, we're safer now. We've been shoving people into cages, so we must be safer. But the message they continue to say and continue to put forth is that we're not safer. It's a never-ending loop. So I think we have to just say it's a false narrative, and it hasn't proven to be true.
Thank you all for those thoughtful responses, and thank you for all of the thoughtful questions. Unfortunately, we are actually coming to the close of the hour. There are still lots of questions in the queue, and we will do our best to follow up with some responses to those questions after the webinar. I would also direct folks to follow up with Danica Radarmel with the San Francisco Public Defender's Office and Nick Brokaw with the California Public Defenders Association, whose contact information will be on your screen momentarily for information about current efforts in the California legislature to advocate for funding for public defender offices. I will now turn it back to Assemblymember Kalra to close us out. But again, want to thank all of our panelists for being here today and for all of the thoughtful remarks, and also to thank the attendees who spent the last hour with us. So back to you, Assemblymember Kalra.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. There's still so many of you that have stuck around for the whole hour, and I know how challenging that can be because we all get pulled in so many directions, and I truly appreciate it. I appreciate everyone that spoke, the lawyers, the social workers. And the reality is that I think when we talk about this, a lot of it is about storytelling. It's about telling the story of what has happened in our state or in our country over so many decades. And we collectively, certainly in the Capitol, have an opportunity to change that narrative and to change it through the policies we put forward. Public defenders are unique because they're actually advocating for less business. They're not coming into the building saying we want to have more clients. The reality is that they understand that what has been happening in our state has not been working, and yet they play a unique role in turning that large ship around. And so absolutely, we need to get more resources into the public defender's offices and those that work with them, including the social workers, because we know that we get far more back in return, both in terms of human capital and actually ensuring that we're making sure that every Californian can live up to their potential, regardless of what stumbles they've made. But also, we know fiscally that we've wasted literally hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars over the years in a failed system that has been advocated for by those that benefit at the expense of so many Californians. And so we had the opportunity to decide our future on this. We've already made huge strides in recent years, and I want to thank so many of you for being part of that process and legislation we passed. I think we're at the next stage now where we can really divert resources to where we know they work. And everyone that spoke today is part of the solution and bringing expertise to all of us in the building. So again, thank you all so much. And you all know how to get a hold of me. So you can always contact me or my staff if you have any questions in addition to the great ones that you asked today. So thank you all so much.